For our math warm-up today, we are going to do some decimal dictation. So I would like to read some decimals to you and number your paper from 1 to 3 and write these down. So the first decimal is 4 and 77 hundredths. 4 and 77 hundredths. So once you've written that down, I'd like you to circle the digit that is in the tenths place and cross out the digit that is in the hundredths place. So let's take a look. How'd you do? Okay, here's your next one. Write the decimal 217 and 437 thousandths. Okay, let's see. Did you write it correctly? Now I'd like you to cross out the digit in the thousandths place and circle the digit in the hundredths place. So take a look. Did you do it correctly? All right, last one. Here's your number. 439 thousandths. 439 thousandths. Did you catch that I didn't say 0 and? Good job. Okay, so in this decimal, I want you to cross out the number that is in the tenths place and circle the number that is in the hundredths place. How'd you do? Nice. I figured you would do well. Okay, let's move on. Our math message today is located in your math workbook. So, you're going to have, for number 1 and 2 for this lesson at the top of the page, you're going to have a grid that looks just like so. You need to shade the grid at the right to show 28 hundredths. And then you're going to answer the question, is 28 hundredths closer to 0 and 2 tenths or 0 and 3 tenths? Use the grid to help you decide. Be ready to explain your reasoning. 0 and 28 hundredths is closer to blank. So go ahead and pause your video and see if you can figure that out. Okay, so if we look at question 1, they asked you to shade the grid, and I have shaded the grid. Let's double check that you shaded it the same way. So we have 2 columns, which represents my 2 that's in the tenths place here. And then I shaded 8 squares, which represents my 8 in the hundredths place. So, number 2, moving on, is 28 hundredths closer to 0 and 2 tenths or 0 and 3 tenths. So, if we look at our grid right now, this would be 1 tenth, 2 tenths, and then if we had shaded in those final 2 squares in that third column, that would be 3 tenths. So, can you figure out the answer? Is 28 hundredths closer to 0 and 2 tenths or 0 and 3 tenths? Hopefully you figured out that it is 0 and 3 tenths because we only needed 2 more squares to make that 3 tenths. Alrighty, nice job. Our lesson today is on rounding decimals. So why do we need to be able to round decimals? Well, just like with rounding whole numbers, that is a life skill that comes in handy for many different reasons. But we could be shopping at the grocery store and we're trying to figure out if we want to buy a single package of Rice Krispie treats, or do we want to buy a big box? Which one is the better deal? And a lot of times on the labels, on the shelf in the grocery store, it will tell you a decimal, like a price per ounce or a price per pound. So a lot of times knowing what those decimals mean and being able to round them to the nearest whole number or decimal is going to help you figure out, how am I getting the best deal? How am I going to do that? And so that's not the only purpose for rounding decimals, but that's just one example. So it is a real life skill opportunity that you can use, and it will come in handy. So don't think it's going to be one of those things that I'm just going to use this in 4th grade math and I'm not going to have to worry about it anymore, or I'm just going to use this in 5th grade math. So let's take a look at how we might do this. So I've got several problems here on the screen, and you might notice that I have number lines. And I'm guessing we're probably going to use those number lines. What do you think? So this will be one way that we can go about this. So let's take a look at the first problem. It says round 3 6/10 to the nearest whole number. So to me, that says whole number, right? So that means if I'm going to look at this number line, I'm thinking of whole numbers. So I'm probably going to put a 3 down here and a 4 here. And then maybe this is going to be 3.5. Okay, so if I set up my number line like that, and I think about 3 6/10, where would I place that on that number line? Well, it's probably going to go right after that 3 5/10. So we would be able to plug in that 3 6/10 here. And so now when I'm thinking about where would I round that number, is it closer to 3 or is it closer to 4? So the rounded number is going to be 4. And did we round up or down? We rounded up. Okay. So let's take a look at the second one. It says round 2 73/100 to the nearest 10th. So that means that I'm going to set up my number line. So this is going to be 2 7/10, 2 8/10. Actually, that's not going to be there. That's going to be in the middle. Sorry about that. So this will be 2 8/10 here, 2 9/10, because we're rounding to the nearest 10th. And so then we need to think about, where would 2 73/100 be? So halfway between 2 7/10 and 2 8/10 would be 2 75/100. Would you guys agree with that? So halfway between would be 2 75. So that means a tiny bit to the left is going to be where that 2 73/100 is going to be. So now when we look at that and we're trying to decide which is it closest to, is it closest to 2 7/10 or is it closest to 2 8/10? Hopefully you answered 2 7/10, so our rounded number is going to be 2 7/10. And did we round up or down? We rounded down. Sorry about that, switch screens. So this went down. Okay, so let's take a look at our third problem. Round 273/100 to the nearest whole number. So this time we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So thinking that this is going to be 2, this is going to be 3, this would be 2.5 once again. Okay, so 2 and 73 hundredths. Well, we know it's going to be past that half mark. And halfway between 2 and 5/10 and 3 is going to be about what? About what? So think of it like money. Halfway between $2.50 and $3 is going to be about probably we can't really do half, can we? So if we think about it, like there is 50 cents, right? If we're thinking money, but we can't really divide that up. So we're going to say that this is 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, and then of course this would be 210 or 3. So thinking about where is that 2 and 73 hundredths going to go? This is our 6. So this is 7 here. So it's going to go somewhere right next to that. So 2 and 73 hundredths would be somewhere in this vicinity. Okay, we are rounding to the nearest whole number. The fact that it is already past the 2 and 5/10 means that we're probably heading down this area, right? So our rounded number would be 3. And did we round up or down? We rounded up. Okay, so this is using number lines to help us round decimals and actually placing them on the number line so you can actually see how close or how far they are from what you're rounding can be very helpful. That one. All right, so let's look at a real world application. So I had said earlier that a lot of times when you go shopping at the grocery store, we see decimals and we see unit prices and things for different types of things that we can buy. So I've got 4 examples here where we have some unit prices that you might see at a grocery store, and these are to the nearest 1/10 of a cent. So if we were going to round to the nearest, or actually they're in thousandths place, they're not 1/10, but we're going to round to the nearest 1/10 of a cent. So thinking about whole numbers and how we round those and looking at these decimals, we're going to kind of go about it the same way. If I am rounding the 1/10 of a cent, that means for this first one, I'm going to be looking at the 3. And I'm going to look at the number to the right, which this is really hard to write on, but it is a 7. So if I'm going to round this number to the nearest 1/10 of a cent, we're going to have 28 in our decimal point. That's not going to change. What's going to change is the 3 going to stay a 3 in that 1/10 place, or is it going to change to a 4? The fact that we have a 7 to the right means that we're going to bump that up 1. So that means we're going to round up. So in that example, we would round to 28 and 4/10. So if we move to letter B, again, we're looking at that digit in the 1/10ths place, which in this one happens to be a 7. We're going to look to the right. We have a 5. So remember, everything to the left stays the same. So we have 19 decimal point, and we have to decide, is that 7 going to stay a 7, or is it going to change to an 8? The fact that we have a 5 means we're going to change it to an 8. So that gives us 19 and 8/10. And then if we take a look at letter C, we have a 9 in the 1/10ths place. We're looking to the right. We have a 1. So my 16 is going to stay a 16, and I have to decide, does the 9 stay 9, or does it change to 10? And if it does change to 10, then that's going to change my 16, isn't it? But the fact that I have a 1 means that the 9's not going to change. Okay, so that becomes 16 and 9/10. In our last example, we have a 6 in the tenths place, we're going to again look to the right. We have a 4. So my 20 is not going to change. Sorry about that. I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay, so we have 20, our decimal point, and our 6. Is it going to stay the same, or is it going to change to a 7? We have a 4. That means it's going to stay the same. So that becomes 20 and 6/10. So as a reminder, if we have 0 to 4 that we're looking at as far as our number to the right, it's going to stay the same. If it's a 5 or higher, we're going to add 1, right, to that number that we're trying to round. So just want to remind you of that. Okay, so there were some real world problems there. We had some practice problems before that. So let's summarize what all we've done and learned today. So we learned that we can use number lines to help round decimals. We can round decimals, or rounding decimals is similar to rounding whole numbers. We just have a decimal point in there. And rounding decimals is a life skill that can be used in various careers and real life situations. Bam! You nailed it, guys. See you next time.